I had colleagues take me to the side and say, don't publish this. You'll ruin your career. I said, what are you talking about?
He needed an armed guard to go to the grocery store, and he needed 24-hour security in his home because he published a paper. Remember Harvard, the bastion of left-wing intellectualism here in the United States of America? Of course, they were in the news recently because their president, Claudine Gay, who decided to allow pro-Hamas terrorists to chant anti-Semitic statements on their campus, allowed them to thrive and continue and bully and harass Jewish students, and then said under oath, yeah, well, uh, Claudine Gay then had to be fired because they found in so many of her papers she had plagiarized and put forth false academia to try to elevate her position. Well, Harvard is back in the news, and this time thanks to Barry Weiss and the Free Press. I want you to see this video. This is of a Harvard professor and researcher who was diving deep into the data of police-involved shootings and homicides in America. In fact, he investigated police-involved violence against suspects of every flavor and kind, from, shoving somebody on the street or manhandling or maybe putting them into a forceful headlock or something when they were arresting them, all the way up to a police-involved shooting. And when analyzing the data, he found something quite fascinating, not just about the data, but about the reaction of his colleagues in the academic left. Watch this.
Those experiences helped me understand what types of data to collect. We collected millions of observations on everyday use of force that wasn't lethal. We collected thousands of observations on lethal force. And the key question, I alluded to it earlier in a bit of a joke, but the key question is not just this arbitrary, silly snapshots that some journalists, not named Barry, do a lot, which is Black people are 13% of the population and they are 50% of the police shootings. I'm sorry about that, but I don't know what that has to do with the question. Right? And it was in this moment in 2016 that I realized people lose their minds when they don't like the result. Right? And so what my paper showed, you'll see tomorrow, like some of you, was that, yes, we saw some bias in the low-level uses of force, every day pushing up against cars and things like that. People seem to like that result. But we didn't find any racial bias in police shootings. Now, that was really surprising to me because I expected to see it.
I want to pause here. There's still another couple of minutes of this. It's fantastic, not just as he dives into this research paper they did and the results of the data, but also the reaction to it. This gentleman's name, by the way, is Roland Fryer. And it's important to point out that he is not a professor of African American studies. He's not a professor of humanities. He's not a professor of criminal justice. He's not a professor of anthropology. Or sociology for that matter. He's a professor of the economy. He's an economist. Economists are interesting cats. Last week we were talking about how Representative Barbara Lee out in California wants to institute a $50 an hour minimum wage. And we debated that issue with her, not directly, but with video clips of Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, two economists. By the way, two African-American economists, just like Mr. Fryer here. Economists, even if they have a political agenda, as Mr. Fryer just admitted, he expected different results. Think about that. This is a professor who went into a research plan and studied data to write a paper expecting a certain result, which I think is a human reaction. You expect something, right? You have certain expectations. Of course you do. But economists can't argue with numbers. It's sort of in their DNA, right? It's sort of in it's who they are. If you decide to be an economist, there's got to be something in you that's like that you just have a love for the data. You have a love for the numbers. You have a love for the formulas and the results. But I think also when you go through at the level that he is as a Harvard professor of economics, you end up building onto what's already inside you, and you create this sort of firewall against political bias. And again, I mean, unless you're Paul Krugman or something, but he's not really an economist, is he? He's a polemic. And he uses the economy and just twists numbers to make people believe what he wants them to believe. This guy is sincere. He saw the numbers, he saw the results, and it surprised him. And he had to stick with the results because that's what economists are trained to do. But because it didn't settle with him, because he was expecting a different result, he decided to have another go at it. He actually tested and tried and audited his own work multiple times. Watch.
The little known fact is I had 8 full-time RAs that it took to do this over nearly a year. When I found this surprising result, I hired 8 fresh ones and redid it to make sure. They came up with the same exact answer, and I thought it was robust. And I went to go give it, and my God, all hell broke loose.
Tell us about that. What was the
Oh, I mean, well, your former paper published a thing, published a report about it, and it was a 104-page dense academic economics paper with a 150-page appendix, okay? It was posted for 4 minutes when I got my first email. This is full of
Now, by the way, the interviewer there is Barry Weiss. This is all written in her publication, The Free Press, which does great work and great journalism. And the reference there to Barry Weiss's former paper, he's talking about the New York Times. He's talking about the New York Times. And you're hearing now the reaction. He publishes the paper. It's voluminous. It's pages and pages and pages with all these footnotes, all these archives. And within 4 minutes, he's getting, this is full of Now watch.
doesn't make any sense. And I wrote back, how'd you read it that fast? That's amazing. You are a genius. People lost their minds. I mean, it was like colleagues of mine were going, well, I don't believe these results. He's using regressions. I'm like, well, what the hell else we been using? I mean, we've been using them for ever. That's what you use. And I had colleagues take me to the side and say, don't publish this. You'll ruin your career. I said, what are you talking about? I said, what's wrong with it? Do you believe the first part? Yes. Do you believe the second part? Well, the issue is they just don't fit together. We like the first one, but you should publish the second one another time. I said, let me ask this. If the second part about the police shootings, this is a literal conversation. I said to them, if the second part showed bias, do you think I should publish it then? And they say, yeah, then it would make sense. And I said, I guarantee you I'll publish it. We'll see what happens.
So there's a little bit more of this, but I want you to just recognize, again, the first part is the part that shows that, yes, there seemed to be a propensity for higher levels of physical altercation between police officers and black suspects at the level of pushing, shoving, maybe even manhandling during the arrest. But when you go to shootings, when you go to the most violent type of police use of force, there is no discrepancy for black suspects and white suspects. And you've got the colleagues here saying you shouldn't publish this. Don't publish this. You'll ruin your career. One quick thing here that I want you to think about as you reflect on that, and then you hear the next part of this. Think for a minute about all of the scientific studies, from economists to meteorologists to climatologists to sociologists, all of the studies and all of the funding and all of the academia focused on climate change right now. And if he is getting this kind of pressure at Harvard from his colleagues over this exhaustive study on this topic, imagine, given the billions and billions of dollars worldwide that is funneled into the climate change agenda and policies. Just imagine what kind of pressure is on people in academia with regard to making sure that only the right papers are published with the right kind of answers and right kind of solutions on that topic. And now watch what else happens to this man. Again, a professor of economics at Harvard.
So it was, I lived under police protection for about 30 or 40 days. I had a 7-day-old daughter at the time. I remember going and shopping for, because when you have a newborn, you think you have enough diapers, you don't. So I was going to the grocery store to get diapers with an armed guard. It was crazy.
He needed an armed guard to go to the grocery store, and he needed 24-hour security in his home because he published a paper that defied the left's dogma. The police officers in the United States of America are murderous racists. And he needed protection. Now, again, that kind of pressure on this one guy on a paper about that topic, imagine what goes on in academia having to do with climate change or having to do with any other report or study that doesn't fit the left's agenda. This is cultural Marxism at its worst. This is the authoritarian regime that is actually threatening people's, forget about livelihoods, their lives, if they don't toe the line. There's that much at stake for the Marxists in this country. And one other point here that Barry Weiss brings up and this is like an hour and 20 minutes. The full video is worth watching. Seek it out and make sure you see it. It's fantastic. And Barry Weiss and the people at the Free Press are doing great journalism. And again, this is Roland Fryer is his name. He is the professor at Harvard who came up with this study, and he's telling his story. And here's the punchline to the whole story.
One of the details in this story is that you were suspended by a woman who I had never heard of until recently. Her name is Claudine Gay, and she said this in a letter to the economics department at the time. Professor Fryer exhibited a pattern of behavior that failed to meet the expectations of conduct within our community and was harmful to the well-being of its members. The totality of these behaviors is a clear violation of institutional norms and a betrayal of trust of the Harvard community. So I guess I want to ask, do you believe in karma?
I hear it's a motherfucker.
And also, does calling for the genocide of Jews constitute bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
1,000%.
Yeah. So again, if the uninitiated is just jumping in and they don't get the joke, let's remind you who Claudine Gay is. Yes, Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, who suspended that man. And you heard the reasons why, which really can boil down to is he came up with a research paper that disrupts our ideological agenda. He brought facts to the table that hurt our feelings. Here's that same Claudine Gay asked a very simple question under oath in Congress.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
And as you see, of course, Mr. Fryer answered that question unequivocally, saying, yeah, of course it does. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if the Harvard Board of Trustees there really wants to do something and make some noise and shake things up and signal that Harvard is back in the business of education and facts, maybe they should hire Mr. Fryer as their new president.